Let's find volunteer success with the phenomenal Lori Gotlieb. Hello, and welcome to Driven's Fundraising Superheroes podcast. You know me, I'm your host, Sabrina Shishante, and as an innovator in nonprofit technology, Driven is here to help you get the most out of your donors, your members, and yes, your volunteers. We have a volunteer management software. We would love to talk to you about your volunteer management program, so reach out to us at trustdriven.com to learn more. In order to get the most from your volunteers, you have to be willing to put the effort in to create an environment for them to succeed. You have to be willing to adapt, pivot, and change to meet the world around you and ensure that there are opportunities that best match the value and skill of your volunteers. You may remember Lori from the podcast already, but Lori Gotlieb is a volunteer pro. She is the person you want to talk to when it comes to volunteer management. She is a contributing author to the Volunteer Management Handbook, 2nd edition. She helped build and teach Humber's Volunteer Management and Leadership Program, and she also works as a consultant. Lori's current venture, Volunteer Success, that she has created with 2 of her colleagues, is changing the game for volunteers and organizations. It is a hub of resources and also a matchmaking site that will help get volunteers and organizations united. Regardless of where they are in the world, Lori continues to push the boundaries of traditional volunteer management through her writing and teaching, and I am ecstatic to have her back on the podcast today. So thank you, Lori, for joining me.
My pleasure.
So from your experience, what does it mean to have a successful volunteer program?
So I think the first word that comes to mind nowadays is flexibility. Volunteer programs, we're having this conversation in a very strange time because we're just, still in the ends of a pandemic. And with the pandemic, everything has been blown up. And I think that nonprofits, specifically volunteer programs, need to, as they come out of the pandemic or rebuild, need to learn how to be flexible, need to learn how to capture opportunities that are different, that can sustain change, that has both the in-person as well as the virtual component. It's interesting, prior to the pandemic, and I think when we had our first conversation a while back, I always said virtual volunteering, was something that I think needed to happen. And it was always at the side of the desk of the volunteer coordinator. And now, when we went into the lockdown, it became the only means to basically run a volunteer program. And so I'm hoping that a successful volunteer program will embed that into their systems, into the foundation of what they do. The other thing is that we really need to look at connecting with our stakeholders and our volunteers and get feedback from them. I think, again, historically, volunteer programs have been very much pushing out information and not gathering information other than, the annual survey or focus group. And I think we need to move to a much more open dialogue with our volunteers because everybody's headspace has changed. And until we kind of figure out what people want now, because we've all changed the way that we're thinking, we need to look at how much education do volunteers want? What is an iterative process? Are we listening to our stakeholders? And so to be a successful volunteer program is going to have these layers, but key is going to be flexibility and creativity.
100%. And I love that you mentioned checking in with your volunteers. I know whenever I'm writing blogs or content and how to better your programs, the first thing I go to is ask the people that you are trying to work with, whether it be your donors or volunteers, because they give the best feedback. Like, they're on the field. Who better to ask than the people you're working with?
Even what they're doing, like even our role descriptions working anymore. We're going to go back to a process are those roles working the way that they're supposed to be working? Volunteers are the only ones that are going to be able to tell you whether that role description is going to be successful, or do we need to break it down, or is there a natural shift in what's happened?
Like, is it about framing the role, or is it more about what the role entails, or looking at the different ways that volunteers can help your organization?
Well, I think it's all three. I think it's how you build it and asking the questions before you build the role. Is the role reflective of what's actually happening? And or also, are we giving the volunteers the right information that they need to have, the right training, the right support, and retaining them? If you look at, for example, volunteering, well, I don't see friendly volunteering going into people's homes going to be happening the way that they're going to happen. But you're going to have to test and see, if you decide to go back into the home, and assuming obviously the client is open to it and the volunteer is open to it. But what needs to be put in place before that? Like what kind of forms need to be filled out? What kind of training has to happen? So it is an opportunity for volunteers to provide some feedback as to what they think they need as well before they go into a home, and or if they're doing virtual volunteering, what it is that they need to be looking for. So I think it's a combination of everything, ensuring that the role is actually reflective of what's happening. And also prior to the role, as part of the role, is like, what are all those support systems that need to happen beforehand? And how are you going to do that when you're not bringing volunteers in for training? Like, there's a whole lot of things that are going to change.
Yeah, you have to stay updated. And you mentioned a lot about virtual volunteers. Do you think that geography is still going to be a big role in how people choose their volunteers? Or do you encourage organizations to kind of open that up and seek for volunteers maybe all over the world and have them work virtually?
So my personal is like, go big or go home. I think that it's opened up a whole world of opportunity here. There are things that come into play with regards to funding, local funding for local volunteers. So I think that there's some procedural issues with regards to breaking down geographical barriers. But I say absolutely. I mean, that this virtual volunteering thing is not going to go away. I think it's going to grow because there's going to be a sense of, yeah, we're going to go back a little bit to where we were, but there's a chance we're going to have another variant. And then there's a chance something else. I think we're at the beginning of something, I hate to say it, versus the end. So I say no geographical barriers. If we could do that, and you can get your volunteers and you can get funding, what a creative way to do things. Like I just see so much opportunity there. To bring volunteers out from everywhere. And the fact is, people are going to be working from home. People are not so quick to leave their homes anymore. Mm-hmm. So they still want to give back. Like, I mean, when the pandemic started, the first thing that happened was we started getting, volunteers are making phone calls, checking in. How you doing today? I got multiple phone calls from places I would connect with. That's fantastic. And we need to continue that process. So why do you have to be living in Toronto to do that? Why can't you be in Florida, New York, Australia and do it? So yeah, but the bigger you go, the more competition you have to. What a great opportunity for partnerships.
Yeah, it unlocks so much. And then you also have the change in time zones, which for some may be difficult, but it also offers an opportunity to cover times when, your Toronto staff may be sleeping, while your LA staff, it's still late, early into the evening. So maybe they can call people internationally. It offers, yes, challenges, but there's so much more you can do when you have different and diverse group of volunteers.
Yeah, and I like that thinking. Yes, challenges. I may steal that. I think that's the future is yes, challenges. Yeah, we're going to have challenges, but so many volunteer programs were blown up during COVID. So many volunteer coordinators lost their jobs. So many big programs. I'm almost, in some ways, I'm so upset with the field because volunteer programs, and I'm not going to name names, in large institutions were completely, blown up. Mm-hmm. And volunteer coordinators, large programs with large numbers of volunteers, and they could not, or wherever it came from, sustain that to keep the volunteer program. So to me, that's really upsetting. That there has been a lot of these large volunteer programs in hospital settings and stuff like that have completely been, like had the wind taken out of its wings. So, I'm hoping that there'll be a fundamental shift there, that people will recognize that you have to build a program that your leadership and your board and your clients are willing to fight for, mm-hmm. and not be the first department to get shut down. Mm-hmm. So, and that happened.
Why would you, not invest in the person who's finding pro bono help, like free help for your organization, and it takes so much to run a volunteer program. I would love to hear what you feel are the necessary steps for every volunteer manager to take. You talked about good leadership. What does that look like in action?
Good leadership is somebody who's thinking in the present as well as the future.
Mm-hmm.
A volunteer management leader who engages many stakeholders, is not sitting in the basement running a volunteer program on their own, focused on the numbers or just the day-to-days. A good leader is somebody who recognizes and is watching what is going on in the world and can be creative and come up with these great ideas and not just keep them to themselves, but actually engage leadership. It has to be, it's bottom up, top down. That doesn't change. Our natural inclination is, to starts from the top and works its way down. So you need to get to the top. A good leader is going to use technology in a way that works for them. And that can be as simple as ensuring that your website and your volunteer pages of your website are up to date, are current, are providing good content, whether that's volunteer training content, whether that's FAQs, whether that's, ways to support volunteers. A good leader is somebody who can build a sustainable foundation, but still allow that second layer of virtual programming or something unique, and somebody who's going to communicate and going to ask. It has to be that 360 kind of thinking at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to think about everything, and it can be overwhelming, especially when you're in a place of leadership. And I think at the beginning of COVID, especially because you didn't know anything that was going on, like it was completely new. But now as things calm down, I guess we can make more educated decisions, and it is important that we involve technology in those decisions for sure.
And the key, that the big word, the word for 2020 was pivot. Remember,
Yes.
It used to be tipping point, now it's pivot, right? So you actually have permission to try things. And the one thing with volunteer programs is they don't cost a lot, but unless we use our voices, and that's been me, like right from the beginning of time, you've got to be loud and and talk to the right people at the right time, and don't waste opportunities. If you ever go back to the office and you're in the lunchroom with your CEO, take advantage of that time. You know what I mean? Like, you've got it. That's what a leader does. A leader is constantly, it's like a shark. It's constantly moving. If it does not move, it dies. There you go.
Speaking of using technology to its fullest potential, you are a partner in Volunteer Success, which is an incredible resource for volunteers, for organizations, and it's just a hub of all of the expertise that you guys have accumulated through your years. Can you talk more about it? Why was it created? What was the thought process around it?
So, I mean, I'm part of a team,
Mm-hmm.
and came in to help consult in this. So Volunteer Success is an online, there's two layers to it. It's an online community hub to connect organizations to volunteers. And it really is for the community, by the community. The thought came from a community thought leader who's been doing tons of volunteer work, in the community for years, and just felt that we need to give the community an opportunity to work together. And, it's a way to give back. So there's like two layers with it. So the actual volunteersuccess.com matching site is going to be launching in the fall. But as a pre-launch, we built in a resource and learning center for not just volunteer, those in the field of volunteer management, but also for volunteers and not-for-profits and thought leaders and fundraisers and like whatever connects not-for-profit together, or provides an opportunity for anybody to learn in certain areas. So the Resource and Learning Center is up and running, and that's going to build into education and webinars and chats and ways to connect to the community. And the Volunteer Success matching side is an opportunity for volunteers to put in their profiles, talk about themselves in a secure, centralized hub, and look at opportunities that organizations have posted. as well as for organizations to put in their profiles, highlight their organizations, and look at potential volunteers and connect with them directly. So it's a bit, it's the matchmaking process, whether it's match.com or Indeed or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an opportunity for organizations and for volunteers to really connect in a meaningful way. There's no cost to it. It's going to be simple and easy. You can personalize everything. It's going to be innovative and iterative. So, I know you're going to ask, what's the difference between this organization and the other ones that are there? In some ways, there's some similarities, but we are looking, our first, thinking is, this is the priority. This is what we're doing. And it's going to be iterative. We are going to listen to our stakeholders. And if they want something, we're going to give it to them. And if they want some changes, we're going to make changes, and we're going to make the matching process easy. And there's no geographical barriers for this. So as you went back into that, our prior conversation about geography, no geographical barriers. Yeah. There's no, it can go around the world if we need to. But even, funny with the Resource and Learning Center, which I've been leading, is when I went out, for the call to action for people to provide content, including yourself, thank you. I got content from Europe. I got content from the US. So it naturally happened. I don't look at geographical barriers, and therefore, volunteer success is looking to be fun and adventurous and provide meaningful connections between organizations and volunteers and like-minded industries. So, we're constantly going to be looking at ways to update things. And on the resource and learning side, we're going to be doing weekly blogs. We're going to do educational material. We're going to build webinars. We're going to have the standard external links and stuff like that. But look at, what do our consumers want, the stakeholders want in the community, and what we can provide. And for some organizations, they don't have volunteer coordinators. They don't have a process to put this in place. So if you look at a small organization or a, like the sports, which are all volunteer driven, all the sports clubs and stuff like that, here's a hub for them to post their positions that they would normally not have access to post, and where volunteers can, look and get engaged, and vice versa. So I think it's going to open up, because we're not looking at particular sectors. We're looking at all sectors.
Mm-hmm. And the Resource Center does a perfect job in doing that. Exactly. Because I was going through the content on there, and yes, there's so much rich volunteer content, but Rob Jackson wrote an article on how to adapt to failure and resilience.
Yep.
And I was like, this is a perfect article, that applies to both volunteers, to leaders, to nonprofit employees. So it really is just like a safe space for anyone in the industry to come to learn, to grow, and to better their programs.
Yeah. And I encourage that, like anybody who wants to even build content, like add content or provide content. I'm not looking at, well, it has to be volunteer management. Mm-hmm. It's something that if it's going to add value to any leader or somebody who wants to grow, or a volunteer. So we're not just, other sites are all about volunteer management. We're looking also at the volunteers. So I wrote an article about, what questions should volunteers be asking before they go out looking for volunteer work. So we're looking for, the voice of the volunteer, the voice of the organization, the voice of thought leaders, mm-hmm. and then everything in between, whether it's social media experts, whether it's marketing experts, whether it's health experts. If there's opportunity there, we're going to post it. And the same thing with the volunteer success matching side. It's about connecting communities. We're not specifically saying we're only looking at hospitals. We're only looking at food banks. We're looking at everybody, including the mom and pop shops in these small little undervalued, under-supported organizations that are in the community.
Definitely, 1,000%. This is a great resource to learn from, but I'd love to hear from your experience as a volunteer management guru. What needs to happen in order for a volunteer program to be sustainable, to, last through challenges like COVID, and also keep their volunteers happy?
Wow, that's like the $1 million question. So sustainability, again, sustainability to me equals change, growth, creativity, and risk management. And I think it's the combination of all these that allows a volunteer program to be sustainable. I think we've talked a little bit about things, like I said, sustainability is your ability to respond to the needs of both your community, because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, but also provide a safe and healthy environment for volunteers to grow in, right, as they go through their stages as well. And so to me, there's a balance of that when you're building a sustainability program. What does that mean in like, like in real, that's a lot of verbiage. Again, website up, running, and providing good content, ability to provide answers to questions that volunteers may want before they get on board. Sustainability number 2 is policies and procedures and processes that are clean and that are responsive to what's going on. We now all have to look at our policies, our procedures, our training, our recognition, everything with the COVID lens on it, because it's not going away immediately. Which then goes into, to be sustainable, you have to have like the 1-year plan, but you got to think 3 years, 5 years, and grow to that. Finally, to be really strong, you need to listen to your stakeholders. You got to be able to be flexible enough to move, but to be strong enough and seen as a expert in your field, to be respected internally and externally. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough one to do.
Yeah, it's like finding that balance of accepting new ideas, but understanding when you have to turn some ideas down.
Exactly. And own it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, own it. Like, you know what you're doing. You're the expert in the field. Like, I mean, when I was teaching, at Humber, and, with my students, you got to own it. Come up with the ideas and don't waffle on the ideas, in any other field, the only way to grow is to take risks and come up with great ideas. And I think that's the same thing with volunteer programs. The issue with the volunteer programs is they've taken a big hit. Mm-hmm. And so again, I think you use the word as positive challenges. Mm-hmm. I think this is a great opportunity to start to think that 3-year plan, and rebuild or change what the volunteer program looks like. So to me, that's going to allow you to be sustainable, but, and evaluate, like, talk the talk, have those conversations, talk about the value of volunteering. And I'm not just talking about the numbers, but I'm talking about those soft things, the impact of, having a phone call from my local religious institution, once a month was so nice. It really was nice. Just doing a quick check-in. Boy, was there that warm feeling, and we all needed that. So to me, that is something that allowed, an organization to be sustainable, was to do that shift and grab their membership and start calling. Mm-hmm. Instead of just sitting around and doing, nothing and waiting this out. So that to me is a key aspect of a sustainable program, is that ability to have a strong foundation, but also be able to grow and move.
Yep. Stay active, for sure.
Stay active. Yeah.
So lastly, before we go today, can you let our listeners know how they can learn more about volunteer success and any opportunities they can take advantage of on that site?
Absolutely. So if they go to volunteersuccess.com, we'll talk about 2 sides. So the Resource and Learning Center, it's volunteersuccess.com Learning Center. And in that site, if you want to contribute content, just do the application form. It goes immediately to myself and we can start the process, or there's an email there and you can email. For the volunteersuccess.com, which is the match, the larger platform, that we're launching in the fall, there is a join now. So you will be the first person to get access once we get going. Read what, how it's going to look. We are going to be starting a newsletter to keep people connected. So right now it's not live yet. By the time this launches in August, we may be very close. But take a look at the site and join, so that you're the first person as soon as we go to launch, or email us if you want to talk to us. Mm-hmm. So we do have, info at volunteersuccess.com, and, we'll be happy to reach out and talk about more. And we are going to be reaching out to organizations as we launch. Because we need content, we need the role positions, we need those things. We can't do this if organizations are not going to provide us with job postings, and we're not going to be able to do this if volunteers don't sign up. So on the volunteer side, sign up, to create your profile.
And for those listening, I will include all the links Lori discussed in the description box. You can just go there, click. It's really easy to submit content. So I encourage you to do so.
Yeah. And even volunteers, people who want to talk about their experiences, if you want to write about it, or, I'm happy to take that. I had one group in Australia that wrote a blog about their experiences as volunteers. It was fantastic.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lori, again, for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
And that is all. As Lori mentioned, volunteersuccess.com is the place to go if you want to learn how to submit content, if you want to get notified when the matchmaking feature goes live, or if you just want to check out Volunteer Success. And I highly recommend you do. It really is a great resource. You could tell a lot of love and thought went into this website, and it's going to do amazing things for the industry. And if you want to stay updated on Driven and everything fundraising superheroes, guess what? We have a monthly newsletter now. That is right. We are delivering content straight to your inbox. You don't have to go searching. You'll get caught up on all the latest episodes of the podcast, get any blog posts, and also sometimes we like to sprinkle some insider tips in there. So make sure, if you're interested in improving your nonprofit, supercharging your fundraising, and getting the most out of your organization, that you sign up. Like I said, the link to do so is on trustdriven.com, but I'll also have a link available for you in the description box. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Fundraising Superheroes.